Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Jordan, and I'm the publisher, also the main writer at The Whole Social, where I'll be publishing this video and also this audio track. Um, I recently wrote about the Telepathy Tapes, which is this podcast series which came out in the last 6 months or so, and yeah, reached the top of the charts. And it's quite controversial, as we will be discussing over the next hour or so. And I wanted to speak with some people who have experience with children, especially non-speaking children with autism, but yeah, children with disabilities, developmental disabilities in general. So the three people who I've brought together, Gleice da Silva is my wife, and all three of these individuals worked together, or worked at the same school in Pennsylvania, the Camp Hill School, which works with such children. And Gleice worked there recently, and we've just moved together to work in an adult community with members with adults with developmental disabilities. And then Jan and Becky, Jan Göschel, Becky Rutherford, both have worked also at that school for many years. And then all three of them have taught in the Camp Hill Academy, which is professional development, leadership development for teachers and for adults working with working with this community. So yeah, I have to apologize in the beginning. My throat is I've just come out of a cold. I didn't have a voice a few days ago, so it's still a little rocky. But yeah, I shouldn't be doing most of the talking, so that's good because I have the least amount of experience in this field. Um, so I'll start off talking a little bit, and I'll say something about the telepathy tapes, and also about anthroposophy, which is the shared approach that we all have. Have I done justice, though? First of all, just to pause. Have I done justice to your biographies? Are we anything else? Well, I didn't say Jan. Good. Jan also is the head of the section for inclusive social development. So that's in Switzerland, in Dornach. It's part of this school for spiritual science out of this movement of anthroposophy. And so that's a kind of association, a loose organization of all the different organizations and individuals who are taking this approach to working with inclusive development, working with children and adults with developmental disabilities. So, yeah, I'll just say a word about the telepathy tapes. I've said that they recently came out. They topped the charts. Um, they're quite controversial because they're describing a phenomena in this community of non-speaking children with autism. It's a question for me also how it relates to the adults, but there's just many examples of these children speaking to their teachers and their parents and speaking about having telepathic experience, being able to read their minds. Um, and so it's a podcast series of 10 episodes with a number of kind of special episodes after, and that's just the first series, the first year. There's more planned. But in that series, the first two really try to do tests on these children. They try to see if it's true that they can read their parents' minds or their teachers' minds, and they have some pretty astounding results. So especially, I'll just say they do randomly generated numbers and pictures and words, and they show them to the parent or the teacher, and then they ask the child, and the child communicates usually, yeah, always via device, an iPad or something along those lines, a letter board where they're pointing to the letters or the numbers. And they do, yeah, remarkably well. In the podcast, they're 100%. Um, so yeah, that's the kind of basis of the telepathy tapes. And then after that, the next 8 episodes, they speak about yeah, parents and teachers' experience with these children. They kind of go through a number of cases. They introduce a lot of different individuals, and then they also start speaking about their kind of spiritual insights, how they're gathering telepathically. Numerous children are gathering telepathically on what they call the hill. Um, Also, how they are telepathically communicating without speaking with their parents or teachers, so they kind of are able to just speak mind to mind. Um, and yeah, also how they have spiritual insights. Some are able to kind of speak about things that are going to happen in the future, although they're very general. And then, yeah, they also speak about communicating with the gods as a kind of general theme. I don't think there's a single atheist child amongst them. They're all clearly, yeah, moving in kind of spiritual realms is the picture from the podcast series. So I wanted to gather the four of us, and especially the three of you, because out of anthroposophy is a spiritual movement that was inaugurated by Rudolf Steiner over 100 years ago, 120 years ago. It came out of the Theosophical movement, and I would just say about it that it's, I would say, unique in that Steiner's approach is comes out of the scientific um, yeah, the scientific movement of our times. So it's a spiritual movement that's meant to not be kind of using seances or anything unconscious, but it's meant to be kind of bringing together the logic and the consistency and the kind of wakefulness of modern science, and bring that to spiritual phenomena, to what's happening in the world, and being able to describe material phenomena and events in the world through this lens, with spiritual insight. So, yeah, if people don't know about anthroposophy, you probably have heard of Waldorf schools or biodynamic farms. There are all these kind of expressions of it in the world. Just, yeah, many, 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 many expressions. It's really worked into the arts and worked into the sciences and worked into all these different fields. So that's the kind of introduction I would give of anthroposophy and also the telepathy tapes. But before kind of just turning towards your experiences in this field, is there anything that you would say would be important to kind of, yeah, touch on at the beginning in relationship to those two things? Huh?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jan?
let's get into it.
Okay. And Becky?
Yeah,
Anything?
let's go.
All right. All right. So then, yeah, you've all been working in the field. You worked with children in, yeah, different capacities, and then you've also worked with adults. But maybe, yeah, it would be best just to kind of start with your experiences on the ground. So yeah, if any of you want to start, and we can just hear from all three of you if you want to share.
Yeah, I would like to begin. I want to make, I've wondered quite a bit about these tapes and reflecting on my experiences over many years of teaching typical children and neurodiverse children, that I think it's a kind of spectrum of sensitivity because all of us can understand and feel the emotional mood of another person. Some of us are better at it than others, but all of us have that capacity, and we feel it's just quite a natural human thing, as indeed it is. And this experience of actually sharing conscious thought just is that just another further along the path, further along the spectrum of how we do communicate, and that this is a way that we become much more conscious and sensitive of this capacity that we have to know each other. I could also say something about neurotypical, very young children. Many mothers talk about this in the most matter-of-fact way, and we laugh, oh yeah, they read my mind. But there can be some very specific incidences that usually the mom has to be kind of in a half sleeping mode, which many mothers of young children are. But I had the experience with my very young daughter being exhausted to have a 2.5-year-old. It was Christmas time, and I was kind of on the couch gazing at the Christmas tree because someone had given us a beautiful ornament, and I couldn't find it looking on the Christmas tree. And my daughter got up and went over to the Christmas tree and pointed to it and said, "There it is," with that kind of inflection. These are not uncommon experiences, and we kind of brush them away. And the tapes help us to become more aware that this is something to pay more attention to.
Nice. Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, I should say since starting to look into this topic myself, I've had a number of conversations where people have shared such experiences. I haven't actually, I don't think I've had such experiences. But yeah, it's nice to kind of hear the spectrum of what people are experiencing. Jan or Gleice, do you want to share. And Gleice, you're muted, so you know.
Yeah, when I started listening to the telepathy tapes, I think one of the things that came up for me, it's a while ago since I've been a classroom teacher, but when I was working in the classroom with non-speaking autistic kids, teenagers, really in this case, I had a couple of kids who had been introduced to facilitated communication, which comes up and is, of course, a controversial technique. This is discussed in the telepathy tapes. There was a kind of a, yeah, you could say kind of a hype around facilitated communication in the 90s, and then there were some studies to debunk it, and then that whole spectrum of methods of communication fell by the wayside and has been marginalized. This is a big thread. I'm not going to go into that further, except to say there's a range of methods. We're not talking only about facilitated communication, but there were kids in my class who had previously been introduced, and I was introduced to that. And I just remembered one boy in particular who was non-speaking, and who had learned that, and I was introduced to that as well. And I had interesting experiences in working with him, which also I couldn't quite figure out in the beginning. They were a little bit like, startling, where I was facilitating his communication, his actually pointing to a letterboard, and I had experiences where something came out of that communication that, at least on a conscious level, I knew had nothing to do with me, that was coming from somewhere else. I also had experiences where I tried to clear my mind, I tried to keep the space open and not influence it, but somehow I lost it in the way your mind wanders. A thought popped into my head, and then exactly that is what came out in the spelling. So I knew that was here, so to speak, here. Whether thoughts are here, that's another thing we can talk about later. But it was here first, and then it came out through his spelling. And even though I certainly didn't consciously, in a physical way, influence him, but these are all the discussions. And then I had also experiences where stuff started to come out that had to do with reincarnation, with karma, with spiritual themes, the way it's also described in the telepathy tapes. And then, I was a very young, inexperienced teacher at the time. I really, I have to admit, I got a little bit uncomfortable with this, with this process, because it was a powerful experience, but I couldn't figure out what to make of it or where to place it. So these things came up when I started listening.
Yeah. Nice. It's great to hear. Gleice, do you want to share? And it also makes me think that we need to say a little bit more about facilitated communication. But yeah, maybe I'll share a little bit more after you, Gleice, unless it comes up in yours.
Yeah, when I listened to the tape, when I first heard about the tape from you, Seth, I was like, yeah, that's not something I want to get into. And I was very reluctant to listen to. And then I listened to the first two episodes and I was like, maybe not for me. And then I kept listening, I kept coming back to it. And the more I listened to, the more I was becoming aware and conscious of the experiences I had in class. And I think, as you said, Becky, sometimes we take lightly and we just take these things for granted and we don't think about them because sometimes we don't know what to make of them. And so you start being awake to these experiences of like, yeah, I experienced something like this. I have experienced this and I have experienced that. And so the more I listened to it, the more I could relate to certain experiences or certain ways that we talked about the children and how a lot of, there's needs so much stillness from us and shutting down your thoughts so they can themselves we can allow them to be themselves and allow them to work and to perform. And often we say when our emotional life is struggling, that they pick it up right away. And sometimes, for the better or for worse, sometimes you come in and you're having a bad day, they pull themselves together and you have an amazing morning, which you don't expect, but it's like they can read your mind and be like, I'm with you today. And today I can be helpful. And there are days when you're sensitive and nothing works because they can't connect to you. So these levels of just like the subtleties of being a class teacher and working with autistic children when they are so much in tune with who you are and what you have to offer and how your emotional life is in that day versus the other day. And with that, over the years, you really learn how to tune yourself in a way that they can actually function in a way that you can hold many of them together in a setting. So I was just thinking about these like more subtle experiences. And I remember the first time I came in contact um, with this guided communication. It was with a man called Larry Bissonette that came to visit Beaveron, and yes, he gave a lecture to us. And when he wasn't sitting and he wasn't typing with his assistant, he was just like any of our children, and he was an older man. And to put the two of them together for me was like mind blowing. That he could sit and that he could type and he could make jokes and he could talk to us and answer questions. And then that was done and he was, his self of like being more um dysregulated in his body, like movements and noises and things like that. And that was mind blowing to me that there was somebody so wholesome inside. And I think I was in my second year in Beaver, and I was very young still. So I was, yeah, those pictures didn't make sense. And there was the paintings that he made and all of those things. And I was like, that is possible. And then reading so many books about written by autistic individuals has also been that confirmation that there's something more there that I don't always quite have access to it, but it would be important to be curious about. So for me, this conversation is more about being curious about phenomena that have happened. And I had a student in my class for a few years where I always had the feeling that there was more in there. And then his family started doing facilitated communication, and that was not taken by the school because it's not taken by the school. But I went to see a session with him, and I was blown away by what I could see. And I didn't feel like it was not his words because I was there. I asked him questions and I couldn't feel like he was tapping to somebody else's mind or that the facilitator was influencing his typing and moving the board. And I started doing with him until I was asked not to do anymore. But I started doing with him and I was eager to like, is there something I can do to unlock what you're trying to tell me? One of the things he said was he didn't like the baby books that we gave him to read during reading sessions. And I thought it was like, yes, that's what we do. It's like one sentence books, right? There's a picture and one sentence. And he said he didn't like baby books. And I was like, true, it's true. So yeah, those are some of the experiences I had. So this, yeah, it's just open up a realm of curiosity and exploration within me. Yeah.
Great. Just because you touched on it for a moment, Gleice, it would be useful maybe just to say that the Camp Hill School, it is a school that's working out of anthroposophy. It's working out of this understanding and approach. And then you described how the facilitated communication wasn't something that was acceptable at the school. But as you've described it in the past, it's not just kind of purely kind of anthroposophists or people working with this kind of methodology. It's kind of a hybrid in some sense. Could you just say, just to kind of get a sense for why wasn't it accepted in a way?
I mean, for the same reasons they talk about it in the tape, right? We have speech therapists that comes from the school district that are employed to work at our school, and they have to follow the guidelines of the companies that they work for. So they do work in our school, but they have other guidelines that they have to follow. So according to their guidelines, that's not something that they support. It's not something that they work. So they work a lot with devices like iPad and things like that, and they try to use typing within the iPad, but they're not trained in those methods. So you can't just request as a parent to say, can you work with this with my child? Because that's not something they're going to do. But I was also asked to not do it either, or to not encourage that. And yeah, and try to understand why not, why that was not something that they were encouraging.
And it was that around the same time as facilitated communication was popular or something that was being talked about, that was around the same time that all the electronic devices got really sophisticated and really easy to use. And people felt they're so effective. And yes, somebody could press a button and say bathroom, bathroom, bathroom. It was a very materialistic way to look at the vast kind of communication. I want to make another point, and that's when I first heard about the tapes and began to listen to them. I felt a bit cautious. Was this just one more way that we other people with differences, with neuro differences, diversity? And I was a little bit antithetical because of that. But as I listened to the tapes and then could relate them to my experiences or experiences from colleagues, I think the phenomena looking to something that everybody has the capacity to do. It's just we need to become more sensitive to it. There's some of us who are naturally gifted at any number of things, and others of us who work hard to develop that ability.
Maybe we can, for the sake of people who don't know facilitated communication, and then the tapes make it very clear that was an early form of what they, or today people who work with this family of communication methods often talk about as spelling, because physically the processes are different. Facilitated communication, usually in the beginning you had a letter board that had the letters of the alphabet. The facilitator would place their hand under the hand of the person who is being supported and give pressure against that, and the person being supported would spell by pointing to the letters. And then with many people, the facilitator over time could move further and further back up the arm to the point, and this is described in the tapes as well, where you maybe only touch the shoulder and that enables the person to do it. Or where you then, with many people, where you only, the trusted facilitator has to be in the room, and then there's the no touch, and the person with the presence of the other person can do it. So then from that, these other methods spun off that involve less touch and they are therefore considered to open up fewer opportunities for influence. But there's still the debate, is there some kind of unconscious influence going on that is transmitted physically through something that the person, the child or youth who is doing this, for example, is picking up from the facilitator. But this is kind of a picture of what we're talking about. And sometimes nowadays, of course, these typing or spelling methods do involve also electronic devices where the letter then is articulated or these things. So it's not about not using electronic devices, but it's a particular, it's the main point with all of those things is that the person needs the presence and in some cases the physical touch of another, at least in the beginning stages often, in order to be able to use their body, that is the hypothesis, in such a way that they can then communicate through spelling. And so there's something happening between two people, and that's really the question. What is actually happening in these processes? And is it the same in every case? And how can we understand it? And this is where, for me, it becomes interesting to look at it through the lens of an anthroposophical way of looking at the human being. How are human beings made up, and what does it mean to be an embodied human being in the world, and how can that change and make communication hard for you or possible, or the use of your body? So this is kind of an interesting spectrum of questions that opens up then.
Yeah, I'd like to turn to that. Maybe before we do, just to kind of reiterate what some of the things that have been said. I mean, so this, as Gleice touched on, and also I think especially Becky, it isn't just a phenomena that's specific to this community alone. We see it amongst human beings in general. We can see it especially with children in the family, or also in a totally kind of typical classroom. One of the insights that I was reminded of when you guys were speaking was Rudolf Steiner, who brought this teaching method for Waldorf schools, speaking about the significance not of what the teacher knows, but of who the teacher is. So it's who the teacher is that teaches the children. And so, the picture, I thought Gleice's pictures were quite strong of, coming into the classroom and based on kind of the day you're having, the morning, however you woke up, how prepared you are, or this or that, the children all kind of, they take their cues from that. They spin off of kind of what you're bringing. And this population, perhaps, I mean, I guess this is a question for me, those with developmental disabilities, especially, they seem like they're especially sensitive in a way. They're especially, they're kind of struggling in the ways that they are, to kind of connect, and then the connection is so kind of delicate or specific that I mean, I thought the picture Jan brought of doing the facilitated communication and a kind of thought popping in, and then that's what comes through the child. So just recognizing, it's not only in this community of people, but in kind of also what we would call neurotypical children and adults. Also, just to say, to think how we all influence each other. I've been reading a bit lately about kind of mob mentality and what happens when we come together in groups, how we influence each other. And, growing up, in college, seeing episodes of hypnosis. And then also in my travels in the world as an adult, I've seen possession a number of times in different places. So, I've seen people who are totally neurotypical, totally like us right now, all of a sudden get into circumstances where something else kind of enters in and moves them. So just to say that, many people haven't, I think a lot of people have experienced hypnosis at this point, but just that there are kind of instances which we've kind of pushed to the fringe, and we don't notice it so much in our everyday interactions with each other. Even though you could say our politics, not to bring that in too much, is like so much one of kind of like group think, where we just get so fired up and so charged by this, this heroic politician who we think is going to save the day, but like, what is it that takes over us? So I do think there's also just experiences in our everyday lives that point to some of these things. But then coming back to these children and their need for kind of, their difficulties in communicating and their need for physical touch. This is, as Jan was saying, the controversial aspect of facilitated communication and these different spelling methods. But it's interesting, your picture, it's giving them something to push against. And just to kind of give something specific from the telepathy tapes, one of the parents early on says, in order for my child's software to work, he needs to use my hardware. So just that they're dependent upon us in a way that, you could say a neurotypical child isn't quite as dependent, although as we're describing, there is some dependency still for sure. Why they are struggling to kind of bring what they have to bring out of their inner life into the world, and use their physical instrument, use their body to kind of bring it, and why they need facilitators, why they need help in that. Maybe we could dig into that. And Jan, you were just describing that the pictures out of anthroposophy can kind of begin to orient us perhaps in that. So maybe you could take the lead on sharing some of that.
Yeah, I can take a stab, and then we can see. So I mean, the best way I can do that, because it's a complex topic, is to try and create a picture, which is sort of why what I take out of, in broad brushstrokes, out of how, from an anthroposophical point of view, and also in Steiner's course on education for children with disabilities, where the process of child development is described from that perspective, how the relationship between the body and consciousness and the body and the world conscious. So there's three things: consciousness with also self-consciousness in it, there's the body, and then there's the surrounding world, and how these three elements relate to each other and how that relationship changes in the course of child development. And I think that is really the crux of the matter, is in order, when you take that picture, a lot of the phenomena that are being described, you can begin to understand them and to think about them, at least, you know. But the crux of the matter is, if you have a materialistic picture of the human being, then you think of consciousness as something that arises as a byproduct of physical processes, and then the whole thing doesn't work. So in order for us to go down that route, we have to, what also comes up in the telepathy tapes and what was in the past acknowledged by all spiritual wisdom traditions, really, pretty much, I think, all that I know of, that consciousness precedes matter. Consciousness doesn't come after matter, but consciousness has a reality in itself. So human beings are spiritual beings with a consciousness that isn't dependent on the body, but that is configured differently when we have a body. So you start actually with the picture that before birth, we are spiritual beings which don't have boundaries. We don't have boundaries around ourselves. So not like a body where I'm here, and if somebody is next to me occupying a different part of space. So we're in a very peripheral, spread out kind of cosmic experience. And then out of that, we connect with the beginnings of a physical body in the mother's womb after conception, and are actually involved in building that body and forming it. And after birth, that continues our child development. And as the body matures, more and more, with every aspect of the body that matures, the body becomes an instrument through which we connect with the outer world, and then have the experience that most of us during our waking consciousness have now. So actually, the pathway of child development is a pathway of going through the body into the world. So we go from one experience where actually our consciousness lives everywhere in the periphery, to another one where it again lives in the world, but through the body, and the body becomes an instrument for consciousness. It makes it possible to experience the world in the way we mostly experience it. And in that, I think it's Seth, you had written in the notes before, something about, well, it seems like some people are locked in their bodies and therefore they can't come out. And we often talk about that. Is there somebody in there? Actually, from this point of view, I think it's actually not, in this case, when we're talking about these situations, it's not a case of being locked into the body. It's a case of being locked out of the body. So if you want to break it down, so what does my body do to me in terms of how I can relate to the world? So on the one hand, it's an instrument of perception. It means because I have an integrated sensory experience of my body, my body can also become an instrument for having an integrated experience of the outer 3D world of space and time. And then what is happening inside is more of a resonance space where that experience can become conscious. And the other thing that my body can do is that through my body, I can also act in the world. I can have a sense of agency, and I can move my body and do something. And what some of those kids are describing in the telepathy tapes is, I cannot sense my body. I don't know where my body is. I cannot feel my body or parts of my body. I cannot feel my fingers. And this is, from a conventional psychological point of view, you can say, the developmental step that people talk about, a body schema, how do we integrate our consciousness with our body so that we have a coherent experience of our body through which we can then enter with our consciousness into the outer world. That is missing, so the consciousness is actually locked out of that body, cannot come through the crossing point of body into the world, and stays in this kind of more spiritual experience, cosmic experience, this experience of living in the periphery and experiencing reality not through the body, but outside of the body. In a way, still a little bit the way we did before birth, presumably, if you follow that train of thought. And then it makes sense also that in order to come at least partially into, to translate into that kind of incarnated experience, so to speak, if somebody touches my body, that other person is giving me my consciousness an anchor to connect, and then I can connect where I can usually not connect. So it's kind of, the picture becomes not locked in the body, but locked out of the body, and therefore having all of these peripheral and merged consciousness experiences. And the last thing I'm going to say into that is, though, in the picture that Steiner gives, it's clear we create when we are constituted like most of us, the four of us are sitting here are most of the time. It's not an absolute this or that, but constituted like that. We create this crossing point in the body, and the body becomes an instrument of resonance, which allows us to relate to the world in a way where we can do things in the world, where we can perceive it coherently, where we can also speak and so on. But a part of us also always stays in that experience. It's only that within that, we also create that kind of inverted inside resonance space. But a part of us actually always participates still also in that other way of being in the world. And therefore, we have, in the Telepathy Tapes, Rupert Sheldrake was interviewed also, who is somebody who talks about this. He uses this picture of field forces or force fields, that we live in merged consciousness experiences, and many of us have these in smaller ways because the other experience is so much in the foreground. But this experience, I think these things that were mentioned, where I pick up the phone to call somebody whom I was thinking about, and just as I pick it up, that other person is calling me, or similar kinds of experiences. So, but this question of which part of me is connected with the body and which part of me lives in a kind of a peripheral, not body-bound way, and how do they relate to each other, and how does that relationship change over the course of development then also, and what can happen so that somebody's integration or non-integration with their body and that experience that comes about through the body is very different. I think this is kind of a spectrum of things that become interesting to talk about.
Yeah, that's, that's wonderful, the picture. It does, especially this kind of contrast between locked out versus locked in. It does make me realize, in a certain sense, those who are kind of developing neurotypically, especially kind of as we grow older, become locked in a sense. You're describing that, we all keep a part of ourselves in a sense out in the spirit, and maybe especially in sleep and times like that, we can recognize that. But yeah, during our kind of waking consciousness, we're kind of so locked in that when we look at children who can't kind of communicate through their physical bodies in the ways that we do, we see them as kind of locked into those bodies when really, in a sense, they're not able to come through those doorways. So yeah, it's a really beautiful picture and kind of inverts the whole thing in a sense. And maybe, I guess it would be nice to hear, are there other pictures in relationship to this that people want to share? It'd be nice to kind of build it up a bit more.
I think this relates to the fact that not all of the phenomena that are talked about in the tapes have to do with facilitated communication, that this merging of consciousness is one of the characteristics of a human being, and that this is tapped into in a different way with some of the kids on the tape, that they are communicating with each other, the phenomena of going up on the hill without the need to point at letters either electronically or manually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, I think, and it also goes, actually don't, and I think in the tapes also it's questioned. I don't like the term telepathy, particularly for the phenomena that are being described. The merging of consciousness metaphor, I think, gets us closer to what, or, this kind of non-bounded consciousness that where you can then have these overlaps because it's not a spatially configured consciousness. But telepathy often, I think, is understood to mean actually sort of from the place of, like you said, Seth, me as a locked in kind of more or less neurotypical grown up in whom that kind of separated consciousness is very much in the foreground, even though the other thing is kind of there as a layer in the background. But how do I transmit a thought to you from that place? But it's actually the other part of ourselves that comes into the foreground when that locked in, separated, body-bound consciousness is not coming into place in the same way.
I mean, I think it may maybe be good to take a moment to kind of build on it, and I guess the question of our development. So specifically looking at kind of neurotypical, the picture you described with the crossing, Jan, and so this kind of using this picture, I don't know, everyone might have a different understanding of the path of kind of like inner development that anthroposophy describes. But maybe I would just take a very quick stab at it, and then you guys could describe it as you see it differently. So my sense for it is that, yeah, we've come out of the spirit, we've come into a body, and all that entails in order to kind of meet the earth, encounter each other, and have the body, this vehicle, give a kind of shape for our experience in the world, and that once we've incarnated into it with as much, in as healthy a way as we possibly can. This is kind of the purpose I would describe of Waldorf education, to kind of bring the child into their body. It's a really like an incarnation process through the educational process. But my understanding is they don't practice meditation in Waldorf schools and the like because that's bringing the child back out already. And so the picture is that you're really trying to bring the child into their bodies so that as adults they have the freedom to, in full consciousness, kind of explore and go back. I don't know if it's though a back, but yeah, wake up to that not foregrounded experience that Jan's describing, this kind of purely materialistic experience, but the kind of background experience, and to wake up in that background experience so that one can build this bridge consciously in oneself between one's presence in the spirit and one's presence on the earth, and what one can experience in the spirit, the different presences, you could say, the different beings, the different types of experiences there, and the experience on the earth. And so that's the meditative work and the different kind of the different kind of practices that one works on within anthroposophy. But do you guys have a similar sense for that's kind of the trajectory of what we're trying to work with in kind of a typical path of development? And then the path of development for someone with developmental disabilities is a bit of a different path. Are we kind of, do people have a different picture? Or are we kind of on the same page there?
Would be nice to hear from you, Gleice, about this, because I'm just starting to think about the work that you do also with adults, more or less typically developing adults in terms of accessing somehow that other side of experience that is not foregrounded in our waking life.
Yeah, I would say yes. There is that picture of like, first you have to come in and out of freedom, reach out to the spirit. I would also add the picture of that I've been thinking about it too, because they say why autistic, right? Why? And all these needs that they have for body integration as well. That when I think about, when the child is incarnated and lives so much with the etheric forces and astral forces of the surrounding, and then they bring with them cosmic energy and cosmic forces that we talk about it too out of anthroposophy, and that as it goes, as they develop, those forces become integrated in a different way. So the memory to the cosmic slowly is losing, or you lose that memory. And that comes with this earthly process of becoming more in the matter and becoming more and more into the earth. So the more earth you become, the more is this capacity to come in and through it. And with a lot of the children on the spectrum, the earthly doesn't happen in the same way, right? And because that doesn't happen in the same way, and this is a question that I carry, is that through which this not happening, this being locked out, that allows them to still be so connected and integrated, because the materialization of it, it's not happening in the same way. And then to be able to be in the earth with that consciousness, there's so much sensory integration that is needed. And the blanket, the quiet room, the quiet voice, um um the room, the mood, everything needs that peace and quiet, and a different kind of integration, a different kind of being earth in the earth, that would allow perhaps some of it to come in and through the body. So that is something that I've been thinking about it, right? Is that what they don't get so hardened by what we need to be able to integrate it and move through the body, that they can have these experiences. So when you go to sleep, where we forget mostly, unless you dream of, you don't have a memory of it, they retain the memory because they're so integrated with the outer. So there is one thing that I would say. But then when you come to adult education, it's a very interesting path of how to support an individual in freedom to be connected to something higher, and to make that connection out of freedom, which is very different than the work with the children. And it is a puzzle and an exciting thing. And that freedom is the double-edged sword, that you can't never interfere in the path of somebody developing. Becky and I are in the process of preparing a retreat and inner work, and you can do the most beautiful one weekend retreat. It is the freedom of the individual to take anything, right? And that becomes like the beauty of adult education, is like, how are you taking this in, transforming, and going the other way, right? It's not like this anymore that happens in childhood and out, but how do you take what is being given to you, transform it, and reach it out in a different way? And that path, this way, it has to be done out of freedom. It cannot just rely on development. It can just rely on a beautiful, world of education, if you will. So I find this path of incarnation very interesting, but also this path of, when I'm an adult, how do I reach out? And yeah, to just bring one more picture, is in the mystery dramas, which it comes out of this work of Rudolf Steiner. There is a story there, the Rock Spring Wonder, that has these very beautiful pictures of the childhood forces, and the child that is able to hold the wonders of the world, and it's able to hold it as beingness, right? They are actual beings that he meets, and he meets the force of the materialistic world in the form of a dragon. And then there is, as the story goes, he becomes a hardened individual that can no longer hold to these pictures anymore. And it is through the dreamlike, or education, if you will, in adult life, that he is able to hold these pictures again and try to hold to the spirit in a transformed way. So just to add to that picture too, of incarnation, but also growing up. And yeah.
Gleice, in your work of helping people develop curative stories, or what we would call therapeutic stories that are so helpful with children, or in their own personal development, you really guide people into this other space of playfulness and creativity, which it seems from our conversation, we're kind of making that a characteristic of this space of merged consciousness. We can look at the children who have this capacity. Many of them apparently do. As you said, Gleice, you know they're in there, but you can't get a hold of them, or you know they're out there and you can't get a hold of them. And it seems that the task that lays before us is twofold. One is how to become more able to enter into that merged consciousness space in a way that's effective, in a way that is useful, in a way that is towards health. That's a kind of outgoing path for us as adults. And then, of course, for the children who feel that I think one of the kids in the tape says he didn't know he had a body. And how do we help them in the opposite path to come in so that we can be with them in this earthly existence on the earth, and they can become more it is who they're supposed to be. I still want children who are non-speaking, kids with autism, who find it so difficult to be in the day-to-day. I still want to be able to find ways to bring them into the day-to-day existence.
I mean, that's really the question. There's something really wonderful about this, becoming aware of this diversity of ways of being in the world, that is available, because it opens something up. And I mean, something that really touched me in the telepathy tapes and these stories was where you could see that for some parents and teachers, especially some adults who had a connection with children or youth who had these experiences, having that connection with a child or youth who has those experiences opened up a pathway of inner transformation for them, where they began to add to their, I mean, presumably they didn't become less functional in daily life. I don't know that much, but let's assume that. But added to that came an ability to also become, again, so to speak, more aware of or open up to aspects of this, what we call this merged consciousness, or this peripheral or cosmic space, and aspects of that experience, which also has many layers, which I think we're not going to get to tease apart here now, but aspects of that. So there's an inner transformation, and I think that's kind of the counter image to what you were both talking about now, also of this. So then you have somebody else who, because of how they are configured and their relationship to their body and through their body to the world is tenuous, for whom that experience is so much foregrounded, and the experience of being a separate being in the outer world and connecting with that is very much in the background, for whom through the educational pathway, especially in the development process, a way can be built to stretch into that experience. And I guess if you sort of, in an ideal world, all of us would have the ability to move freely between this peripheral experience and that experience, and to kind of shift our attention. I mean, that would be kind of the ultimate goal, to move freely between those different layers of experience and bring them together and enter relationship with each other. So on the one hand, I think if you're, as an educator or as a therapist, when you're working with a child who is in that situation, you know, what they lose, what we lose if we are really present in the outer world, is we lose pretty much all awareness of this other way of experiencing the world. what we lose when we're in this other way of experiencing the world is really pretty much any way of directly becoming active in transforming the earth, transforming the world, of kind of leaving our signature in the outer world and doing all of that stuff, which is also something that I believe is a human task, is to transform the world, not to just escape the world. But what is wonderful about becoming aware of, and I think where it's also the telepathy tapes in highlighting this are great, becoming aware of the fact that there is also, in terms of how we are conscious, there is, for all of us, there's room to stretch and grow in different directions. And then in the educational process, really in the therapeutic process, the question is, how do I build a relationship to my body so that that can become an integrated experience through which I can connect with the outer world?
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful place to begin to close it. I think we're just about time. Maybe just to kind of tie some of the things that were just said together a little bit. I do think it's quite interesting to ask this question what is these? There are these children who have incarnated in this type of body, in this type of situation, with these types of disabilities and difficulties. And then, instead of seeing it as some like terrible error that needs to be, like if we could just erase all of that experience, we would try. Instead saying like, well, what's happening here? People are, if we look out into society in general, there are different people with different needs. And some people are very able to be productive, fully contributing members of society. And then there are the children, there are the elderly, there are people who are sick or just have needs that others don't have. And what do those needs then call on from us? What does that make possible for all of us? It's not just about them and us. It's about like, how are we all working together? And this picture that you brought, Jan, of what is it kind of calling out of, or what is it asking of the people, the caretakers, the parents, and the teachers? Like, what are they needing to develop because they're working with these children who are having a hard time kind of coming in. And so then, it does. I don't know. It struck me as quite beautiful that in a way, if we don't just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not really the best term, but we just have a picture of how things should be, and instead saying like, okay, well, these are the ways things are, and what do they have to teach us? And there just are so many more children who are coming into the world with autism in the present, and so what is it? What are the opportunities in it as well to kind of begin to open up this kind of bridge a bit more in our own experience between the spirit and matter. So, I think it's good to maybe end with a kind of question in that way, because it is, as we talked about before the conversation, we are just kind of full of questions. I mean, we have certain kind of pictures out of anthroposophy that are living in us, but it's just a whole realm that needs to be explored in much more depth. So hopefully, I don't know if we'll find ourselves in this specific constellation having another conversation further. Perhaps we will, but these are conversations that need to continue. So I look forward to whatever form they come in. And before I hit stop on the recording, just to say thank you very much, the three of you, for agreeing to join me to kind of wade into these waters and see what we can see together. I think it was incredibly fruitful, definitely for myself, and I think for viewers, they'll find it that way as well. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Becky. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Becky.
All right.
Bye.